Hi friends, welcome to the NPTEL course Business Development from Start to Scale. We are in week 10 with the theme of Business Development Competencies. In this lecture 49, we will talk about cultural skills. Culture is an important aspect of business development because business is global while culture is local, and we need to make relationships in several local cultures. There are four important needs related to business development from a cultural perspective. We need to partner with multiple individuals and entities, and they belong to multiple nationalities. We need to develop long term operational and strategic partnerships with stakeholders as part of our business development activity. We need to institutionalize collaboration to withstand environmental vicissitudes. We need to have cross cultural management expertise in business development, therefore. What is culture? Culture is the characteristics and knowledge of a particular group of people encompassing language, way of life, religion, cuisine, social habits, music, and arts. Culture is positioned in many ways. Some examples are as follows: country or region culture, working class culture, affluent class culture, urban versus rural culture, the study of Japanese language and culture. Cooking is a hugely important part of French culture. He is no longer in touch with youth culture. The film examines the culture clash between the generations. There is difference between startup and big company culture. So when you look at culture, it mystifies as well as demystifies several things which are related to business development. That is why it is important to understand culture as we look at business development as a holistic and integrative management practice. There is a cultural cascade related to any particular business organization, and that is influenced by multiple cultures that envelop a business organization: a national culture, regional culture, political culture, social culture, business culture, and organizational culture. Culture impacts the way a business or an individual undertakes collaboration, or how it competes, or how the negotiation takes place. The impact of culture on the business process is significant. What are the several dimensions of culture? Principally, it is a pyramid of three tiers. One is one of basic assumptions. These assumptions are invisible and innate in organizations and in individuals. For example, an organization must have a culture that seniority must be respected, elders must be respected. Another organization may say that it is not the seniority but only the intellectual level that should be respected. Then we have values, beliefs, and preferences. These are the explicit guiding principles that occur throughout the organization that are visible. For example, customer satisfaction is primary. Then the way the culture manifests itself in terms of behavior is the visible and day to day interactive part of culture. Actual physical conduct, the way people interact with each other, whether they are positive or negative. These are the three tiers of culture in an organization. But small things do make a big difference as far as culture is concerned. The way you meet and greet people, the way you exchange your business cards, the way you communicate with each other, the body language displayed in negotiations or otherwise, the patience one displays in dealing with issues and also dealing with people, the reflection one undergoes when the issues of importance arise, the review processes that are adopted by individuals, teams, and organizations, the manner of agreeing on any issue or even disagreeing on any issue, and the way a particular discussion or a transaction is brought to close. These are all apparently small things, but they do make a big difference. Corporate culture is top down in a sense. Corporate or organizational culture is the specific set of behaviors, practices, and systems that are driven by the values adopted by people and teams in the organization. And this message is set by the tone at the top. If the founders, if the boards, if the chief executive officers set the correct tone for culture in an organization, that cultural cascade will permeate throughout the organization. Ratan Tata in 2006 stated, "Business, as I have seen it, places one great demand on you. It needs you to self impose a framework of ethics, values, fairness, and objectivity on yourself at all times." Ratan Tata speaking in 2006. There are five core values of Tata Group: integrity, responsibility, excellence, pioneering, and unity. Why is culture important for business development process? It is so because negotiation, one of the most important planks of business development, which we have covered in the previous lecture, is influenced by culture. Let's look at the way five different business development leaders from five different nationalities respond or create a business development activity in terms of negotiation. As far as goal setting is concerned, an Indian negotiator would tend to be opportunistic, an American aggressive, European conservative, Japanese cautious, and Korean again aggressive. In terms of negotiating attitude, Indian style is very personalized. Americans is objective. European tends to be very evaluative. Japanese very reflective, and Korean again aggressive. In terms of style, an Indian negotiator tends to be flexible. An American negotiator adopts an open structure. European negotiator is completely measured. Japanese negotiator is minimalist and Korean is rapid. In terms of the time sense, Indian negotiator is flexible, American negotiator is strict and within the bonds, European negotiator adaptive, Japanese negotiator measured, and Korean negotiator urgent, would like things to happen the next day. Emotional quotient in an Indian negotiator is open, it is visible, whereas in the American negotiator, it is never displayed. Europeans tend to be warm, Japanese polite, and Koreans pushy. In terms of the agreement form that is adopted in negotiation, India again is pretty flexible, whereas American is almost legal. European very specific in terms of the requirements, though not as legal as the American negotiators are. Japanese broad and general, whereas Korean also follows a broad and general approach. In terms of the flow process in negotiation, Indians are willing to do several parallel types of negotiations, whereas America would like to have a sequential success in the negotiating process. Europe also follows the same methodology of sequential stage gating, and Japanese does that as well, whereas Koreans, like Indians, are parallel in their negotiating approaches. The team organization is pretty flexible in respect of India, structured in respect of America. Again, Europe is structured, whereas Japanese very comprehensive. Korean is highly individualistic. The decision making in India is generally top down. The negotiating team follows what is stipulated by the top management. In respect of America, the decision making is delegated. So is it in Europe, and Japanese adopt consensus method, whereas Koreans are empowered in terms of decision making. Risk taking is high with respect to the Indian negotiation. America tends to be pretty calibrated. Everything has to be assessed against the business rewards. Europe has low risk aversion or low risk tolerance. Japanese also have low risk tolerance, whereas Koreans take high risk while negotiating an outcome. There are basically three types of cultural drivers. The first set is corporate factors related: the history of a company, the ownership of a company, the professional leadership in a company, the developmental stage of the company, and economic health of the company is one set of factors. Then we have industry factors, that is, whether the industry is functionally oriented, what is the dominant growth driver in the industry, the key sources of competitive advantage in the industry, the developmental stage of the industry, and the economic health of the industry. In respect of national factors, history, religion, philosophy, ethnicity, social state, economic health, demographic profile, human development index, and governance impact the way the culture gets evolved in a particular nation. All of these things together constitute the cultural imprint that exists in a specific form. So, it is difficult to analyze culture by any one filter. One has to have multiple filters to understand and shape the culture of an organization. What are the cultural peculiarities of different types of industrial organization? Here I talk about the nature of the firm and the cultural expression. Let's look at a promoter led company. Cultural expression is top down, opportunistic, whimsical, agile, emotional, and committed. If a company is a small scale entrepreneurial company, the cultural expressions would be cautious, risk averse, minimalist, calibrated, and support seeking. Whereas a large entrepreneurial enterprise will be aggressive, ambitious, expansive, risk taking, and wealth oriented. For example, Adani Group of Industries. It reflects all of these characteristics of a large entrepreneurial entity. Let's look at a startup. It tends to be adventurous, innovative, irreverent, risk taking, and aspirational. Professional company would be planned, analytical, risk and reward balanced, and accountable. A public sector enterprise would be bureaucratic, approval driven, non committal, and governance driven in its cultural expressions. A listed company, which could be a large private limited company as well, would be responsible, accountable, compliance driven, and market cap driven. An unlisted company, again, could be a large private company, could be autonomous, multi party, transactional, secretive, and fast. A global multinational corporation would have standardized cultural expression. It is policy driven, slow and methodical, and evaluative. So, depending upon the nature of the company, the scale of the company, and its ownership, there could be different kinds of cultural approaches adopted and inherent in industrial organization. Let's look at the specialization of the firm in terms of the key industrial bearing and the related cultural expression. If you are an FMCG company, your cultural expression would be marketing and supply chain oriented. Everything the company does is oriented towards the market opportunity and the customer. If you are from an automotive organization, the whole approach would be highly technological, product operations and marketing oriented. A pharmaceutical company will be based on innovation, quality, and marketing oriented. A banking and financial services as well as insurance company will be focused on relationship, safety, security, and assurance oriented approach. An electronics company would display technology, product, and marketing orientation in its cultural expression. An energy company will be technology, investment, and climate oriented. A food company will be cosmopolitan. It will have ethnicity. It will also have nutrition as its major planks. A hospitality industry would look at being global, world class, and networking oriented in terms of its cultural expression. A commodity industry will be standardized, cost competitive, and volume oriented in its cultural expression. How do you pierce the veil as far as the culture is concerned? How do you understand what is the true intrinsic culture of the organization? This is important for successful business development. What lays behind the cultural wheel of the partner company must be understood by the business development executives. There are four types of questions which are needed to be answered in any business development interaction a priori. Is ownership distinct from management in the company? Is management of the company truly professional? How is decision making carried out in the company? Are leaders empowered leaders? Who are the sponsors and approvers for the partnership project? Who are the other stakeholders? Does the company have a culture of entering into partnerships and respecting partners, or does it treat partnership as a transient activity? There are some markers for professional culture in any organization. Fundamentally, respect for organizational structure, respect for business processes, respect for individual, and respect for meritocracy. Positive answers to these questions and to these markers will go a long way in laying strong foundations for win win partnerships through business development. When we have culture, it is not just the national culture, there is also international culture. The following international culture differences impact the success of business development and project management. I talk about four different types of relationships and team workings and interactions as well as transactions. Let's look at the interpersonal relationships first. How do interpersonal relationships occur? They occur through communication, the etiquette we display, decoding of attitudes and behaviors of individuals, and understanding the unexpressed silent language. Some cultures are overawed by expatriates while some are hostile, and that also determines how the discussions take place between countries of different cultural origins. Then we have multicultural teams, that is, within a nation, within a firm, there will be people of different cultures. Then you have the differentiation between expatriates and locals. There are challenges of group building, working, and relationships. There are requirements for conflict resolutions. Some cultures in such a situation go with the flow, while some cultures shape paths. Then you have managerial interactions, that is, the interactions between bosses, colleagues, and subordinates. Important for these are feedback, control, and coordination mechanisms that exist in an organization, the rewards and punishments that are provided to the team members, the personal space that is allowed to the individuals in terms of their thoughts, expressions, and actions, the motivations that drive the leaders, managers, and individuals towards their action paths. Some cultures are compliant by nature, while some are independent. As far as partnerships and transactions are concerned, these are very legal, but at the same time, they are business oriented and outcome oriented. They look for the future being made stable through a contract. Contract negotiations, joint ventures and partnerships, official meetings, community events, and social events are some of the attributes of partnerships and transactions. Some cultures believe in partnership while some are individualistic. That is, they believe in the CEO far more than they believe in a contract. Each forum and interaction will need to be fully experienced by the business development person to be effective in the international cultural setting. In any multicultural environment, one would encounter major obstacles. We would think that the discussion of differences could be uncomfortable, inappropriate, threatening, or illegitimate. Therefore, when people of different cultures are a part of a meeting or a business development platform, people tend to tone down what they would like to express. On the other hand, people also could make the mistake of assuming similarity or homogeneity despite the basic cultural differences that exist. Similarly, members could assume unnecessarily dissimilarity or divergence in different positions. The very fact that cultures are diverse is denied sometimes, and therefore, the cultural diversity is lost as a potential resource and is transformed into a significant handicap. In negotiations or in interactions, the richness of diversity is lost on the way. There is no guarantee that one culture is the best culture, and it is also not true that one culture is the best culture. Cultures have different strong points and different weak points. If you understand and appreciate and recognize the cultural diversity, the richness of multiple cultures could be brought into the discussion forum. The gap between the pretended similarity and inner conviction of actual difference widens and creates uncomfortable situations when multiple cultures and people representing multiple cultures are involved. At the same time, having an extra cautious behavior and unproductive, costly politeness emerge as coping mechanisms to handle the situation rather than resolving any of the cultural barriers. And this in turn leads to low risk taking, avoidance of confrontation, and achievement of the smallest common denominator. Therefore, the way we look at the differences, the way we look at the diversity, the way we understand and assume the cultural facets would all have significant impact in terms of multicultural environment management. There could be obstacles, and if well understood, there could be enablers as well. To have cultural synergy, we got to have some capability to conquer the mindsets of individuals who are involved in cultural interactions. Every individual, a team, or an organization will have certain cultural blinds, and they impact the seamlessness, the openness with which cultural interactions take place. So, the six important cultural blinds we should be aware of and we should eliminate are as follows. One, extreme individualism, because mutual accommodation and respect is the bedrock of cultural harmony. And because of this reason, extreme individualism has to be eschewed for cultural synergy to be effective. The other danger of mindset is parochialism and nepotism. Any narrow, self centered, and biased viewpoints will block cultural harmony. So, we need to be open, transparent, and objective in how we deal with each other. Having self centricism is one of the biggest blocks for cultural synergy, because whenever you get together as business development partners, you got to look at the other aspect of agenda as well. This is what we discussed in the previous lecture on the negotiation skills. The belief that one's way is the best way of thinking and acting negates cultural progress. The other block for cultural synergy is stereotyping. It is a blind. Certain cultures may be characterized by certain typical behaviors. It cannot, however, be assumed that everyone from that culture presents the same pattern. Although I am from India, many of the Japanese collaborators who dealt with me told me that I am an Indian with a Japanese mind. So I am not a characteristic Indian as far as they are concerned in terms of collaborating or discussing business development. So we cannot typecast any individual just based on the nationality or the understanding of the national culture. Each individual is likely to be different as far as the business discussions are concerned. The other thing is that if people are not aware of their own cultural blind spots, they can never achieve cultural synergy. It is important for the parties engaged in partnership to introspect about their own cultural blocks and clear them sooner than later. Again, extreme emotionalism is not good for cultural synergy. Business is based on facts and figures as much as on desires and aspirations. There is certainly an emotional content in business discussion, but having too much of it could work against objectivity. So, these are the six cultural blinds which could be the stoppers for achieving better cultural synergy: extreme individualism, parochialism and nepotism, self centrism, stereotyping, lack of awareness on cultural blind spots, and extreme emotionalism. These have to be removed from the business development culture if the business development leaders have to be effective. Let's look at business etiquette. We talked about simple things making great impact. Every nation has a business etiquette which needs to be understood and appreciated. Let's look at six different nationalities: USA, Europe, Japan, India, China, and Korea. How does one address the other when the people meet with each other? USA addresses through first name. Europe also through first name. Japan always says san, Kudo-san, Sibirao-san, Raju-san. That's the way Japan addresses. India, we address with respect. The way we respect others is very much reflected in the way we talk about the other person in terms of name or saying sir, etc. China is impersonal and so is Korea. How do we introduce ourselves in business discussions? USA does it through handshake, at times very firm handshake. Similarly, Europe. Japan does bowing. Every Japanese executive tries to bow before the others as they meet with each other and also as they depart. India does handshake, at times namaste. China handshake and Korea bowing. Visiting card exchange is very casual in USA based negotiations. Europe adopts a semi formal approach. In Japan, a visiting card is provided with a lot of care and attention. And if you provide a visiting card, the Japanese carefully read the visiting card and note the importance of the visiting card as well as the person who has given the visiting card. India tends to be semi formal. China is casual and Korea again is semi formal. As far as the dress code, generally USA has moved to business casual approach in its dress sense. Europe again is formal still. Japan is quite formal in terms of the dress code in business negotiations. India adopts a business casual dress code. China is quite formal in its dress code, and so is Korea. In respect of seating, when you undertake business development negotiations, USA tends to be informal. It is not necessary that the most powerful person within the team, by way of title or role, should be at the center of the table or at the head of the table. That person could be anywhere, even distant. There is no one to one relationship between the titles when people of one party sit in opposition to the other party. When I say opposition, it is not opposition in terms of contesting, it is just sitting opposite to each other. Whereas in Europe, the seating arrangement is semi formal. In Japan, however, it is formal. The managing director could be seated center, duly accompanied by the deputies, the general managers, and so on. In India, again, it is semi formal. In China, it is directed. It is very well understood who calls the shots, and people look up to that person to be able to make good talk. In Korea, again, it is semi formal. In respect of talking as part of the discussions, USA people tend to be matter of fact. Europe, factual but free flowing. In Japan, oriented discussions are discussions by Japanese people. It is all politeness and measured way of talking that counts. India has a free flowing discussion, and at times it becomes very boisterous as well. China is very directed, very formal, and very controlled. Korea is again a free flowing discussion style. Body language of a US based negotiator is very casual. European, semi formal. Japan, quite formal, quite measured, following the nationalistic rules of how people should interact. India, semi formal. China, again, formal but controlled. And Korea is semi formal. The sensitivity time varies across the regions. USA is very sensitive to time. Europe is also sensitive to time. Japan, even more time sensitive. India is not time sensitive in terms of the business development negotiations. China is also not time sensitive. Korea is time sensitive again. As far as the eating habits are concerned, we also need to spend some time. Eating, that is dining out, is one of the important aspects of a successful business development approach. Many of the problems that have been encountered in the day long discussions are somewhat easily resolved during the dinner discussions because they are the basis for people to loosen up and exchange some of the collateral aspects of the discussions that have taken place. In the USA, dinner is always early and quick. Therefore, if you are dealing with a USA partner, it is not appropriate for you to suggest a dinner which is beyond 8 p.m. or so. So you got to understand that USA and its people would like to have early and quick dinners. Europe, again, early and quick dinner. Japan, you can extend to as long as you need. It could even go up to the midnight, late and slow kind of dining out. India, late as we all know. China is late, so is Korea. Asia generally seems to have late dinners as opposed to USA and Europe. The overall etiquette has no role in negotiations. That is, the way you seat yourself, the way you kind of wiggle in the seat, or the way you walk in the boardroom, or the way you respond through your body language has ultimately no role in negotiations as far the USA based executives are concerned. So is it for European executives as well. But for Japanese people, the way the overall etiquette is conducted in business negotiations does have a big role in negotiations. India is quite flexible, it says go with the flow. In China, it has again big role in negotiations because the chief, the general manager, or whoever has to be shown due respect. And in Korea also it has big role in negotiations. So business etiquette has got so many manifestations which vary so widely across nations that a successful business development person will be one who understands all the nuances deeply and conducts himself or herself accordingly. When we say something, it is not that we mean that completely or that it is understood literally based on the words that are put in. Let's look at a typical culture translation guide in business development. What the Indian teams say, what the Indian teams actually mean, and what the West worries about. So let's say the team says, I will deliver the project. What we are meaning it is the outcome that I am committed to and nothing else. Indians do not bother too much about the process or the journey that leads to the outcome. Whereas the West is always bothered about every stage of the process being perfect to the timelines and perfect to the way it has to be done. Then the West worries. The company concerns me on the process that will be adopted, which would lead to the results. So, what you said is interpreted in a different way by the West because the West has an understanding of how India would function. Let's say the Indian team says, please do not worry about the team. We have everything already done. What you are meaning is that we can assemble a team in no time from ground zero. The West worries that the quality of team members and the project management has not been specified in writing upfront. Another way of Indian teams saying, oh, by the way, it should not matter as long as we deliver. The inherent meaning we have is that the contract is for the product and not for the process. Therefore, partner, please do not worry about how we are going to conduct this process. You just be worried about the product. The West worries that the team does not understand the stage gated processes that are very important for delivery of the project. Many times, stage gated processes are important because the other party has to set in motion several other activities which are related to the product that would appear on the scene a few months later. Unless those are put in place, the project will be incomplete from their end. And if a project is getting delayed, there's no point in marshalling those resources. They view the whole thing from their viewpoint. Again, trying to assure an Indian team could say that this is not the first time that we are undertaking a project, therefore, no worries. And the implicit assumption we have is that every project is repeatable. Please do not worry. Whereas the interpretation by the West could be that the team is complacent about the uniqueness of our project. Another assurance we give, we are on the top of things, means don't ask us questions. Whereas the West says that the team is casual. Can we consider some other options for project delivery? Which means, from our perspective, we should have freedom in delivery process. And West could interpret that to say that the team is not so sure after all. We can do more than this project. We tend to be growth oriented, we tend to be opportunity driven. So, even as we are discussing a project, we start talking about the next project that we could do. And we also are driven by the perception that when you are discussing a project and when it seems to go towards convergence, this would be the best time to secure more projects. The West thinks about it as the team being unfocused. If the project delivery lacks, it is not going to be due to us. That is, we say that whatever we can do within our control, we do. But if something goes wrong elsewhere, we are not responsible, is the indication. We cannot control the uncontrollable, is the less said but betterment aspect of our team expression. Then the West worries that the team has simply no plan B. Your project is more important to us than to you. That is, if you try to indulge in hyperbole to say that your project is more important to us than to you, the actual implication is that we don't think you are critically dependent on this project. Then the West will say the team doesn't understand every project is critical. So you can see from these bits of dialogue as to how what we say is probably influenced by what we think in a different manner internally. And we don't know how the West thinks about that because of their own way or their own culture of doing things in a very tight and project managed manner. So we need to understand these translation guides so that we choose appropriate words, appropriate phrases, make appropriate propositions when we think about building business based on project deliveries. Then in any organization, you have inclusive culture, you will also have authoritative culture in various divisions. In some cases, the entire organization could be inclusive in culture, and the entire organization could be authoritative in culture. Let's look at the features and compare these two cultures: inclusive and facilitative on one hand, authoritative and hierarchical on the other hand. In an inclusive culture, there would be open disagreement based on perceptions, and facts are encouraged, even in public forums, even when the leaders are there. This approach brings out several ignored or unseen dimensions for better quality decisions. In the authoritative or hierarchical cultures, the boss's opinion is final. Even initially, the way the bosses express their opinions determines how the team is expected to be responding. There is no public disagreement that is allowed in town halls. Therefore, the quality of discussions and decisions will be poor in authoritative and hierarchical cultures. In an inclusive culture, people will feel empowered to take initiatives on their own without waiting for the boss's approval. Therefore, it enhances the business canvas. Whereas in an authoritative or hierarchical culture, people will not take any action that is outside of the instruction set that is already provided. Always approval first and action next. This makes an organization and its team members completely risk averse. The risk is not because of the business risk. The risk is because of the worry about the risk an individual has in terms of doing something which has not been approved by the boss. In business development interactions with potential partners, the inclusive cultures will emphasize hierarchy much less and provide much higher emphasis on stature, and this helps in more fruitful outcomes. Whereas in an authoritative culture, hierarchy has to be matched in any interaction. Titles are required to be matched in any interaction. So, a vendor who is discussing has to have a senior person representing. If the general manager of the buying company is involved, so the expectation will be on matching of hierarchy and titles as a preferred requirement. The process and outcomes could therefore be bureaucratic. Significant openness exists in inclusive cultures to multiple ways of communication, both formal and informal, and this builds relationships within the company as well as between companies. Whereas in an authoritative culture, communication follows the vertical hierarchical chains, and this often leads to siloed working. Inclusive and facilitative cultures have one strong characteristic. They display an ability to develop relationships which cascade throughout the organization. And this is typically inspired by the leader's style. And this results in collaborative team working. Whereas in an authoritative or hierarchical culture, only people in similar titles or roles will be spoken to, and this leads to communication barriers. So it goes without saying that if a company has an inclusive, facilitative culture, then the prospects of doing business development improves. And this is something which leaders and managers must take note of. And that's why the chief executive of a company must have the responsibility, actually self recognized responsibility, to achieve cultural transformation, to deliver superior results. When Mike F. Ball came to Hospira in 2011 to transform the quality systems and the quality capabilities and delivery capabilities of Hospira to the next level, he came up with an agenda of cultural transformation, and he transformed the culture from within the organization all through the leadership approach. So he said that there are two planks of Hospira's cultural transformation: make a difference, fix the foundation. The Hospira is a great company. It was an offshoot of Abbott's Hospital Products Division. A team of enterprising leaders took over that hospital's division company and brought it to a significant stature in the generics injectables position and in medical devices market. They also acquired companies such as Main Pharma and a couple of other companies, as well as Hospira's acquired Indian injectables business assets and drug pipelines. It had a global leadership position, and it was the largest injectables manufacturer in the US market. Similarly, it was number two in devices. But when Mike Ball came and when he resolved that he should transform the company culturally, he first created cultural anchor for transformation. And he came up with eight cultural anchors. The first one was quality focused, compliant, act with integrity. Be customer centric in whatever you do. As an individual, as a team, and as a company, we should be accountable and responsible. And he said that our communication should be direct and authentic. We should be fast and nimble and continuously improving in everything we do as a company. You should be thinking about the mega trends, therefore, you should be anticipating as a cultural aspect of your behavior. We should focus, and the focus should be on the main thing. We should be global and interdependent. As the managing director of Hospira India, I could witness firsthand the enormous cultural transformation that Mike Ball did in Hospira. And how did he accomplish it? By stating clearly what he wanted to do. We are executing a deliberate multi part plan which will transform the cultural anchors from words to how Hospirians choose to behave. That was Hospira CEO Michael F. Ball in 2011 after he took over the leadership of the company. So he had two planks: reinforce the foundation, turbocharge growth. And to be able to do that and make a difference to the company and therefore make a difference to the company's standing in the generics industry, he had a five planked program. One, communication, communication, and communication. Second, integration. Third, top down leadership, that is setting the right tone at the top. Then, stimulating bottom up engagement. And finally, reward and recognition for the right behaviors. And what else did he do? He recognized the barriers to change and developed success factors for cultural transformation. That's because we have to overcome the barriers to success in any cultural transformation. It's not that any culture is significantly bad. Culture at times evolves in a time specific or generation specific manner, and you need to change the culture from time to time to be ahead of the curve. So any cultural transformation journey must be resolute enough to overcome barriers to change and achieve success. Such a change in turn serves as the bedrock of strategic transformation at any company. So what are the barriers to change? What are the success factors for cultural transformation? One of the barriers to change in any cultural transformation exercise would be the absence of a visible cultural theme. Here, as you have seen, the company brought about an integrated development of cultural anchors, communications, and programming within the company. Resistance to change from legacy culture and practices could be another barrier to change. For that, the leadership has to unveil a complete cultural transformation program. The leadership has to integrate cultural anchors into everyday activities and communications. From displaying the cultural anchors on the dining tables and the notice boards to frequently conducting town halls which talk about newer cultural anchors is the way to go. Inadequate time commitment from leaders and managers to develop the mindset and skills required to drive cultural change, because some leaders tend to get occupied with business priorities rather than cultural priorities. In the case of Hospira, it was different. Senior leadership and management provided complete support. The teams were encouraged to support. Leadership did role modeling in this process. In any cultural change, messages of cultural change as well as barriers get stuck or distorted at every level of the organization. When you have leadership and top management support for positive messaging and frequent role modeling, this barrier will disappear. Generally, in organizations which have been of great vintage, even minor cultural changes take a long time to implement. However, rolling out the communications and programming quickly enough to hit a tipping point to drive change would be the way to go for having success in cultural transformation. So, looking at the way companies require cultural transformation from time to time and the way companies have transformed themselves successfully on cultural dimension, I have developed a framework for successful cultural transformation for any company. Let's say you have low quality and productivity as one of the issues you have, and that clearly is not a technical aspect, it is a cultural aspect. So you need to recognize that cultural change is paramount because both quality and productivity are behavioral aspects of how you do things. And to be able to do that, first you set the new tone at the top. Foster an open culture. Then you liken the organization to a swamp where the alligators and crocodiles are below the swamp. You don't know. That means, euphemistically speaking, you don't know the problems that are beneath the surface. So you drain the swamp, so to say, so that the alligators and crocodiles are seen by you, and which means the problems are noticed by you. Then you develop the appropriate cultural anchors. You communicate across the organization, implement changes, you demonstrate the benefits, reward good behavior, counsel against bad behavior, and in these processes, institutionalize cultural change. And that's how the framework works. But to be able to do that, first you must understand the current culture in an organization. You should not have your armchair assumptions about the culture. It's also not sufficient to have an external consultant do it and you look at it from a distance. You got to participate with an open mind. You got to have one-on-one discussions. You need to undertake group discussions. You have to administer questionnaires. You have to have observations and recommendations, and finally you should develop consensus. Then only you can understand the current culture of the organization, and these must be held at multiple levels in the organization, from the most operating level to the most senior level. And there are always, for any organization, cultural anchors that are available as a menu from which the appropriate ones can be chosen. Some of the important cultural anchors for any organization are as follows: respect for individual, being customer centric, being performance oriented, operational excellence, accountability and responsibility, being authentic and open in the thought process and in the expressions and in the conduct, displaying ownership and passion in whatever you do, displaying quality and productivity, compliance to high standards of environment, safety, and health, as well as environmental empathy, social responsibility, and corporate governance. These are all desirable cultural anchors for any company. These are, I would say, very generic cultural anchors which will be specific to every company. So, how do you foster a positive culture? I have given you a framework, but if I delineate further, I would think of these six as the most important methodologies that you can utilize to develop a positive culture in your organization: communication, outcomes, leadership, process, compliance, and trust. So, what should be the facets of these cultural change parameters? What is a positive communication culture? A positive communication culture is one where you have transparent propositions. There is no hidden agenda. If you go to your boss and you say that I need this, you should be transparent about why you are making this proposal. What are the pros and cons? What do you think will be the barriers? And what are your recommendations to overcome the barriers and making this success? Similarly, when the boss responds, there should not be any hidden agenda either. It should be very clear. If he thinks or she thinks that it is an experiment worth doing, it must be said in clear terms rather than saying that, no, no, I don't believe in this, but yet you do, kind of thing. So, propositions must be standardly transparent in any company. Then, expressions must be open and unambiguous. The feedback, when it is required, must be positive and open. Finding a fault is easy, finding a solution is more difficult. One of the biggest mantras we must have in our interactions in any organization: do not find a fault, please find a solution. That is important. And there must be active listening. Everybody wants to hear one's own voice, but it is important in discussions to have active listening so that the other point of view is heard with empathy. There must be a positive outcomes culture. Businesses exist to achieve results. Therefore, for every activity we undertake, there must be an outcome. But this outcome cannot be driven through aggression. It cannot be driven through task orientation alone. The outcomes culture, which is positive, has the four following facets. It will be fact and data based negotiation. It will be a synthesis of key enablers and disablers. You should focus on principles rather than on personalities, and there should be interest in progressive consensus building. This positive outcomes culture is very important for business development processes and negotiation process because facts and data provide clarity and objectivity. Understanding of key enablers and disablers tell us how to proceed in future. Focus on principles rather than on personalities, as we discussed in the previous lecture, is one of the most important aspects of overcoming distortions in the negotiation process. And interest in consensus building at every stage of the negotiation goes a long way in shortening the process of negotiation and strengthening the final outcome. This is the positive outcomes culture. And of course, not necessarily third in order, it always permeates every activity in a company. The positive leadership culture. It should be inclusive, facilitative, and empathetic in its style. There must be a mix of task and relationship orientation. It is not that only an emotional relationship will help a team to deliver results. A task orientation also is required, but it must be balanced, well fused. There must be an egalitarian culture in the company which is encouraging meritocracy. That is, you have to refer to the earlier discussion about the inclusive and facilitative culture vis-a-vis the authoritative and hierarchical culture. We should have a mix of flat and hierarchical communication. Vertical lines are important. At the same time, horizontal dispersion of information is also important. Then processes are important. The way we conduct our business processes is also going to influence how the culture is perceived and how the culture is developed in an organization. We must have well laid out policies and processes. The relevant processes must be articulated a priori. When you do a particular change in, let's say, in distribution model, the processes that must be adopted in undertaking the change must be articulated a priori. That helps in positive process culture. Similarly, when business development negotiations are undertaken between two partners, it is good to explain how each business or each company conducts its process. At the same time, the processes must be such that they are contextually agile and flexible. There must be holistic appreciation amongst all team members on the process integrity of any activity within the organization or between the two companies. Then compliance is another very important aspect of culture. We must comply with good ethical values. We should be value driven in how we conduct ourselves as members of an organization. We should be compliant with schedules and we should be sensitive to time. We should be uncompromising on core but reasonably adaptive on others. We should have respect for jurisdictions and regulations because any business development is likely to be cross border as well. So we have to have due respect for jurisdictions and the relevant regulations. It applies for both the parties. The other important cultural facet is a culture of trust. This is the fundamental driver of a positive cultural transformation and its institutionalization. A culture of trust will be good when it is task based, when it is efforts based, when it is outcomes based, and when it is also relationship based. And trust should not be based on simply the following: individual comfort, positional proximity, and mere loyalty. Trust which is developed based on these kinds of short term transient factors is unlikely to lead to any tangible trust culture. In fact, it will distort the level of trust in the organization, and trust generated based on such minor comforts is going to be failing very soon. So, we have to create in our organizations, in our teams, a sustainable culture of trust which is task based, efforts based, outcomes based, and relationship based. And I have outlined earlier how all of these things can be developed in a positive cultural format. Thank you. And I must state at this point that as a business development leader involved in multiple multinational negotiations and having seen hundreds of executives, managers, and leaders from different kinds of companies from all over the world, I could gain an enormous appreciation of the importance of business development, negotiation, and culture. And it has been my endeavor to bring many of these things into the lectures that I have talked about in this particular week. But I must also acknowledge the role played by Professor Prakash Sai, a senior professor in the Department of Management Studies in the Indian Institute of Technology, who also proposed several constructs of negotiation and cultural management as part of his global business management course. And he has been kind enough to enable me, to allow me to take some of the constructs and adapt them to put forward my thoughts through those conceptual filters and constructs. So I'm thankful to you, Professor Sai, and I'm thankful to you, participants, for having devoted a lot of attention and a lot of interest in understanding the nuances of business development through negotiation as well as through cultural transformation. Thank you once again.